Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our success stories. Today, I have a very special guest who is not a very conventional consultant, as you would call it. He has a passion for performing arts. He's also very analytical in nature, and he has a background in pharma. And through this entire journey, he is secured in admit with the HEC's MBA program. So, just to further understand his background, we'll just talk to Nabeel today. So, Nabeel, you belong to a rare breed of consultant that happens to be active in performing arts also and is a management consultant also by professional. So, why don't you just elaborate on your background?
Hey guys, Nabeel this side. I think so. To elaborate more on my background, I just want to know, the people I grew up around, from corporate backgrounds or from business backgrounds, would call like my family like a very alternative family. I have teachers, there's journalists, there's people in film. So for me to actually come to corporate was actually quite safe, and have some sort of become like some sort of like the corporate black sheep of the family, but I really liked consulting in the first part. um so I majored in economics in my undergrad, but I also always wanted to do something creative alongside it, just to kind of become part of something a little bigger and it's something a little more uh personal. So I think that's why uh doing theater, I had no experience with theater until like the age of 18.
Hmm.
But as I continued to develop my skills in my university's theater practice, I realized my passion for things like acting and writing. And especially one of my favorite things was, trying to, become a director and really recognizing my goal and, becoming a good leader and manager. So when I eventually had to, you know, get a job post my undergrad, I realized consulting was the only real place, because that to me at least is the place where you can be the most creative whilst also being in a management and a corporate space. But yeah, but after moving to consulting, it was a bit hard initially because of COVID and the pandemic. But then once those things kind of died down, I also really wanted to head back to the one thing that really helped grow my confidence, and as well as like just kind of be a contributor from the outside, because it's obviously very tough to contribute primarily in theater. So I shifted my gears to become more of a producer. And since 2022, I've produced over 5 plays in both Pune and Bombay, and in competing in big competitions such as Thespo. So yeah, it's been a fun journey.
Yeah. No, that's helpful to know because, conventionally we get a lot of people coming from very quantitative backgrounds and they don't have really that creative outlet, so to say, right? So, Nabil, I mean, just to, double down on this, how has theater and this creativity outlet really helped you professionally in your consulting career, right? I think there are something that,
Yeah.
when we initially met, you told me that it really has benefited you professionally also. So, why don't you just elaborate on that?
I think the biggest like thing that I've taken from theater to my life as a consultant would be learning how to, manage my presence in
Mm-hmm.
front of people, and not just like online in person or on calls, but like in projects, in teams, to kind of manage my presence, to kind of take a step back. Because
Mm-hmm.
essentially, like, what we've always been told is to always put your best foot forward all the time. But I think it's very important to know when to let others shine. It
Mm-hmm.
also taught me like one of the biggest things that it kind of taught me was like the importance of like rehearsing things. When you're a consultant, you're talking to a lot of different stakeholders every single day, and you might not have the same message might not resonate with every single person the same way that you intended to. So taking a step back, understanding who your audience is, practicing would make that, change. And that those are some of the things that theater really kind of helped me with my consulting career.
Okay, since you were very well placed with your consulting career, I think everything was going good. You were there in Pune, you were working with a lot of high impact clients,
Yeah.
pharma clients, and everything was going well. And particularly in a firm like ZS, where it can be where you're well placed as a consultant. What prompted you to really think about an MBA, and why take that time out from your professional career to really pursue the degree? I mean, what was the entire motivation behind the MBA?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good point because like ZS Associates is like a really it's honestly a really great place to work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a superb training ground. You'll find in some incredibly great youthful people who actually care about doing good work and who are not that who don't really who care more about the work than about the optics or bringing themselves out there all the time. And another thing I'd definitely love to like point is like the kind of projects I've done over the last 5 years at ZS were like all over the place. I was doing things in like pure strategy in M&A as well as public sector work. So it was like a great breadth of projects, even though it was all based in one industry, which is the pharma industry.
All right.
But that's why I actually wanted to do my MBA. I think with ZS, there was definitely a tendency to be incredibly grounded in one industry. And one of the reasons I always thought to myself that, okay, why do I need to shift is I just at least need to see what things are out there except pharma. I think being in ZS, you're exposed to a lot of consultants and a lot of people in the pharma space, but essentially for me, that wasn't enough. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do an MBA. I've also felt like I reached like an inflection point in my career. I wanted to see that with my consulting skill set, with my pharma industry expertise, what else can I do apart from doing like essentially the same kinds of projects with companies. So yeah, that's something that really pushed me to do an MBA. And I think the last thing would be the fact that I really wanted to meet people who had come from all different walks of life and had done all different kinds of things. So that's something that I'm glad HEC is a place that you can really go and do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So how did
Yeah.
you go about, planning this entire MBA process, right? Because looking back at it, you know that it's a fairly extensive undertaking, requires a lot of time, commitment, effort, even outside your work. So how did you go
Mhm.
about planning this? And also, just to add on, what would you say was the biggest revelation during this entire 6, maybe 7 months journey that you've undertaken?
Yeah. I think the first like not the roadblock, but the first thing I really wanted to get done with was to kind of get a GMAT score that I was happy with.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I kind of attained that goal that I had set, the first thing I did was to kind of research the kind of counseling options that I could get around getting my admissions through. Because as a consultant in ZS, it's very tough to actually manage both applications as well as your actual work without getting any sort of guidance. So that was something that I really wanted to get. And then once I had started my work with Abhinav, I think the first thing that we did was to kind of help shape like a story around what I felt was a fairly straightforward corporate career.
Mm-hmm.
We then mapped out like target schools, geographies, and then all of this was also based on like what kind of future I had set for myself. So I think the one
Yeah.
good thing that is the kind of focus that like we have around what do I want to do in the future, because the MBA is not a course where anybody can just come in and try to do anything that they want. There definitely has to be a sort of focus on, okay, these are like my plan A options, these are my plan B options, and that's something that with Abhinav I could help calibrate on the kind of schools and the kind of geographies I could go to using what I had planned for myself. I think then, like, the biggest revelation for me was realizing that MBA cohorts are like built around group dynamics
Yeah.
and not just quantifiable strengths. And like, I've been in the Indian education system all my life, and
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely like a big shift in mindset for me, because essentially what we've been so used to hearing is that if you get the best marks, you're automatically there. If you're the smartest person, like if you're quantifiably the smartest person in the room, you are supposed to be there. But the incredible thing about MBA selection programs outside, I don't know if it's in India, but outside, definitely in the Europe and in the US as well, is that they want to create a class of the most diverse set of people that they want. So that's something that I'm glad that I could work with enough to kind of, create a story around this, the work that I do, which is primarily incredibly analytical with a little bit of the creative side that I bring in outside work. So yeah, it was quite good.
Yeah. No. Nabil, I initially recall that, you were torn between, say, the US and the Europe MBA programs, and then I think there was a little bit of back and forth between the two. So ultimately, I think you decided to go with the European MBA application process with the European Business School. So, what was the tipping point, or what was the deciding factor that, motivated you to go down the European route as opposed to the US MBA route? And why I say this
Yeah.
is because, we consistently find a lot of students coming back to us and, asking whether I should go to the US or the Europe. And so what is your thought process like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so, like, there are pros and cons to each geography. Okay.
Hmm.
With the US based programs, you have access to like what ideally was like an easier process to kind of get employment.
Hmm.
You have access to the world's largest economy, definitely. And you also have access in almost all the programs to a 2 year format, which actually
Yeah.
gives a lot of room to explore.
Yeah.
But for me specifically, to give some additional context, I actually grew up in the UAE.
Hmm.
So even as a child, I had always seen my future in the EMEA region because that's where I grew up. And for that, Europe definitely spoke to me a lot more because if you know anything about the Middle East, you would see that the European mindset is valued a little bit more than an
Hmm.
American mindset. And that's something I really wanted to learn from and kind of, imbibe in how I think. So I could actually make a reasonable shift to the EMEA region. It also has a shorter format, which definitely like logistically leads to like lower costs overall. But another thing about the European MBA programs, which again very surprising to me, is that most of these programs, that the foreign cohorts are higher like in percentage than the American programs. So I one of again circling back to like I think a couple of questions earlier, I wanted to meet people from all over the world, from all different walks of life, and that's something that a European program gives you a little bit more than an American program.
Got it. No, that's helpful to know. Obviously, I think in terms of diversity, the European programs are tend to be far more diverse than the American ones. Typically, the split in America is roughly 60-40. So
Yeah.
60% domestic and 40% international. In Europe, it's like I think no one nationality is
It,
more than
it,
10%, just as a
yeah,
broad rule of
I
thumb.
think it's like 90-10. I think
Yeah.
99 right now. It's quite
Yeah.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Nabil, can you just briefly talk about your application journey, this roller coaster ride that you had to undertake, and what was and were there any
Yeah.
surprises during this entire process?
Okay. I think so for me, going chronologically, I got in my score around mid-September and I had started working on my applications around mid-October.
Mm-hmm.
So the first couple of applications were some of the European round two applications, such as INSEAD and HEC. After completing those, my initial goal was to continue to apply in the EMEA region. But because I'd gotten my application to HEC quite early, and even before the point where like your most US programs have their round two, which is like in early January, I could pivot my approach to, even though I've said that I preferred European school, I could pivot some of my approach to targeting top US based programs just so that I could. Because
Mm-hmm.
to me, I'd already gotten like a big European target in the bag. So that's something that like it, and I think through like this pivot, I realized how much more I wanted to go to Europe than the US.
Yeah.
and how grateful I was that I got an admit quite early.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite good. I think the biggest surprise was like just like how I thought about it, because I think when you initially think about MBA, you always think about the rankings, you always think about um the better, the higher, more prestigious school, the better. But then when you're actually doing the applications and when you're going through interviews, and believe me, I did a lot of interviews, you realize that you can't lie yourself to go to another place just because it's like, okay, this bit more prestigious or this bit more this thing. At the end of the day, everything is gonna align with how you feel like your life is gonna go to.
Yeah.
you know you already made like a commitment for a few months, not even a few months, like a few years at least, to thinking, okay, and it's just very tough to kind of pivot out of that. I think that was quite interesting also, like just very interesting to see like how, like, and not just me, just the people around me who were applying for the MBAs, how much the uncertainties around sponsorship and um visa issues were taking in their decision making process at well. So I think that's something that kind of, a bit surprising to me. But yeah, it was good. It was a very good journey I had.
Yeah.
It was definitely a lot of work, but if you want to do it, then I would just say do it properly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I think just coming back, I mean, one question that we ask all our, students or applicants is any advice that you have for any student who's sort of, at the crossroads of, maybe applying to an MBA, still confused whether he wants to, go down the route or not. I mean, so any advice that you'd have for them?
Yeah, I think I'd emphasize the future that you have set for you should help you narrow the options. That's something that you need to really calibrate before you even decide on um or this industry or anything. You have to really ask yourself three questions.
Hmm.
And these three questions are like super important to say, okay, do I really need to go for an MBA? Because for many people, the answer would be no. A
Yeah,
lot of people feel
absolutely.
like, okay, even though people say that the MBA is declining, there is still a lot of prestige associated with going to an MBA in a top program.
Hmm.
So the three things that, you know, if you're an applicant, you should definitely think about is: one, do I want to shift geography?
Yeah,
Two, do I want to shift
absolutely.
industry? And three, which is like I think the least important, I feel, but it's still an important thing to consider. If you're in a broad industry, do I want to shift functions in an industry?
Yeah,
Even if two out of three are like definite yeses for you, don't just say, okay, now I need to do an MBA. Think about what these industries are, what these geographies are, what these functions are. Then understand through that, when you filter down your needs, basically,
hmm,
then understand which schools fit your needs.
yeah,
And also which school fit your financial needs, which school fits your lifestyle needs, because a lot of different schools have different ways of getting a lot of like different cultural quirks in a lot of different schools. So just think about all of
yeah,
that too, but mainly to pivot your decision process around these three points.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that's something for me, honestly. For me personally, like, do I want to shift geographies? That was one of the most definite yeses that I had.
yeah,
And for parts two and three, I was more or less like two-thirds sure. So I was more or less ready to make this decision, because to me, I just realized, okay, if I'm ready to make this shift and I know where do I want to make this shift, I can, go for my MBA.
yeah. No, absolutely. I think this is an important factor. Two out of three shifts, I think, is something that, you really need to go back and have a strong sort of internal debate, whether and
Yeah.
how feasible are those shifts, particularly in this changing geopolitical climate and, this economic concerns or macroeconomic headwinds. So I think, yeah, that all these factors sort of should be there on everyone's mind, when they sort of assess whether they should leave their, job, the position that they are in, and really go ahead and sort of make their investment on an
Yeah.
MBA. Yeah. So Nabeel, it
Yeah.
was lovely talking to you. I mean, we wish you the very best. I mean, we hope to see you succeed at the HEC MBA program, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more of you in the future.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you so much, Abhinav. I think it's been a fun journey of definitely a lot of ups and downs, but more or less,
Yeah.
I think just, getting in was definitely something that, I feel like that was a great thing to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.